In this lesson, we'll take a look at some of the different parameters found on the various 3ds Max light types. Alright, so essentially picking up where we left off in our previous lesson, now that we've had a chance to explore and really understand the difference between some of these different light types found in 3ds Max, now let's start to take a look at some of the different parameters that will begin controlling these. So again, making sure I'm in my Create menu, and inside the Lights creation, I'm going to switch down and make sure that we are creating the standard light types. Now let's start with something like a target spot. So with the target spot, what we'd first do is click to enable this. Now what we can start to do is begin actually making changes to this light as far as the intensity, its color, and things like that before we even draw this light out. But as a matter of personal preference, I really prefer to make these kind of changes after I have the light in my scene. So making sure that I have my target spot active, what I'm going to do is start by clicking and dragging in my left orthographic view. Normally I would try to recommend against drawing your lights here in any kind of a perspective view, because with your orthographic views you get a little bit more control. So what I'm going to do is start by actually clicking and dragging where I want the light itself to be. So if I want my spot to be positioned up here, start by clicking and dragging. So you can see up where I started my click, I do have my spotlight up in that area. Again, I'm still pressing and holding on my mouse button, so I'm still in this drawing mode. And what I'm essentially doing is now drawing out where I want the target to be. In other words, where I want this spotlight to be aimed. So once I have this in position, I can now let off my mouse button, and we now have this light that's been created. So once I have this light in my scene, I'm just going to right click to exit my creation mode, and now we have the light that's been positioned. Alright, now what we might do, just to make this light a little bit easier to see, is here in my perspective, let's click on my smooth highlights. Let's go to Lighting and Shadows and enable this hardware shading. Right, so with that, we can now get a little bit better idea of exactly what this light will look like. So I'll just press Alt-W on my keyboard to maximize this view. Alright, and with this target spot, if I wanted to reposition this, I could do this by just switching to my Move tool and actually moving the target itself. So you can see how that will adjust this. Or I could also move the spotlight itself. Alright, so whichever method I want to choose, you can see that by moving the actual spotlight itself, the actual target or the aim or the point of the spotlight's focus really never changes. Right, so this can be, like I said, a really nice way of moving the light without really adjusting and modifying where that light's actually pointing. So let's take a look at some of the different controls and some of the different parameters found on these lights. So with this spotlight active, I'm going to go into my Modify menu. And in this area, we can start to control whether or not this light is active or inactive. We can choose whether or not we actually want this light to have a target or not. And we can also start to control some of the different shadow settings found on this light. Now, the shadows are something that we'll take a look at in a bit more detail here in one of our later lessons of this course. So for now, we're just going to skip over the shadows area. And below this, we have the intensity and the color. So this is essentially now where we can start to control the overall intensity of this light. So if we start to take this multiplier spinner and start to drop this either up or down, you can see we're essentially now just controlling the overall strength of this light in a little bit more interactive manner. And we can also start to control the overall color of this light, or what color this light will be emitting. So you can see right now by default it is going to be a little bit more white, but let's say we wanted to change this to something a little bit more on the blue side. We can do that, and that change should immediately be affected in our light. And again, we can use this multiplier spinner to control the overall strength or weakness of that light. Now, as far as the overall cone of light that this spot is emitting, we do have some specialized controls found underneath this Spotlight Parameters rollout. So if we turn this on and expand this, we have control over the actual hotspot and the fall off. So the hotspot, or the beam, is essentially this innermost cone of light. So as we start to dial this down or up, you can see now we're basically making this spotlight's cone wider or more narrow, just controlling where that area is starting to focus in on. Now you notice that as we start to dial this value up and then begin bringing it back down, you'll begin noticing that we have kind of this outer value here as well. Now this is the actual fall off, or the outer field. So this is really controlling the overall softness of our cone of light. So you can see when these two values are very similar, how we start to get this really, really sharp cone of light. But as we start to increase this outer field, you can see that our spotlight cone starts to become softer and softer. And we can also start to control whether or not this is going to be a circular cone of light. We could also make this something a little bit more rectangular as well, and start to stretch this or pinch that if we wanted to. Alright, now after creating any type of a light in 3ds Max, if at any point in time we wanted to change this, we could actually do this by just simply creating a new light, or we could actually switch the light type from this pull-down menu. So at the moment you can see I am using a spot, but let's say for whatever reason I wanted to now change this to a directional light. Well, all we have to do is pull this down, switch that to a directional, and now this is using the directional light. And you can say it's maintained all of my same settings, all of my same parameters as far as the color, intensity, and so on and so forth. Now with this directional light, again, if you recall from our previous lesson, this was actually something that was intended to illuminate our entire scene and illuminate this very evenly because of these parallel rays that are traveling from this particular light. But one thing that you'll notice is that if I were to actually render this out, that's actually not what we will wind up getting. So let me scrub over here and render this out. And you can see that while we do have this very, very even lighting all throughout this illuminated area, it's definitely not illuminating the entire scene. So if you're using some kind of a directional light, and if you are getting this type of effect, what we'll probably need to do is take a look at some of these different directional parameters. And just like with the actual spotlight, you can see we do have control over this light cone, so essentially giving our directional light some kind of a fall-off area. And what we can also start to do is begin actually controlling what's called the overshoot. Now this overshoot, once this is turned on, what it will do is now illuminate everything, even if it falls outside of this particular cone of light or this area of illumination. Now this won't actually appear here in our viewport. What we'll need to do is actually render this out in order to see the effect. There we are. And again, I can render this out by just using the keyboard shortcut, which is going to be Shift-Q. Alright, so now that we've had a chance to take a look at most of these common light parameters, as far as the overall switching of our lights, controlling the overall targeting, adjusting the actual color and the intensity of our lights, what we'll start to do in our next lesson is begin exploring some of the different settings that are found in Mental Ray, and after that we'll have a chance to start looking at some of the different shadow functions found in 3ds Max.